Just like every other kid, I remember I used to be creative. I used to love to draw as a kid. I remember I wrote this fictional short story that I wish I still had. I also wrote comic books and illustrated them, and then I stapled them together. I also wish I had that. And then at some point, I don't know exactly when, maybe during my teens, maybe a little bit older, I stopped seeing myself as a creative person. It wasn't until later on where I started my dancing journey, or years into my dancing journey, that I started feeling like, you know what, I'm actually a creative person, and I feel creative. And somehow I then gained it back, and now I see creativity as any other skill that anybody could improve upon, obviously relatively speaking, but I think anybody can become more creative. And throughout my journey of being a dancer, a dance instructor, and later on now during my entrepreneurial journey, I've learned a few things about creativity that I wanted to share here for anybody who's wanting to become more creative. So that's what this video is about, is how do you become a more creative person? Okay, so let's dive into that. Let me talk about here. So step one is, what do you want to be creative about? And creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum. So creativity isn't this thing that you're like, okay, I want to be more creative, so I am going to start doing random things, start dressing with colorful, I don't know, I just like some wacky artist or something. That's not what creativity is about. At least for me, the way I see creativity is kind of this muscle that allows you to see different alternatives. You have different ideas for what you want to try. So in a sense, it's kind of like a very practical skill. It's almost like the ability to problem solve and come up with different solutions, something like that. And so the first thing you need to decide is what you want to be creative about. Creativity isn't, again, about becoming some sort of wacky artist. You need to decide, okay, what do you want to be creative about? Maybe you want to be creative in your business. Maybe you want to be creative playing music. You want to be more creative when coding. Maybe you want to be more creative when it comes to remodeling a house, writing fiction, writing marketing. You could become more creative at anything. You could become a more creative swimmer. So really, creativity isn't just like its own thing. Creativity happens when it's paired up with something else. So like, for example, for me, when it came to dancing, right? I became first more creative in my dancing journey, in dancing as a hobby at first. Okay, so that's the first step. You need to decide what you're going to be more creative about. Again, it isn't just about like taking some psychedelics and becoming like really wacky and like, you know, when I think of somebody who is quote unquote creative, they're more like out of touch with reality, always daydreaming, wearing colorful clothing, and like maybe even being flamboyant. Like, that's not what I mean by creativity. What I mean is like you are able to see more possibilities. Okay. So step number 2 is to master the mechanic. Okay, so what do I mean by mastering the mechanic? Think about it this way. Let's say you are a writer and you're trying to be more creative when it comes to your writing. If you haven't mastered sentence structure, or let me even give you an even easier example. Let's say there is a word that you don't know. So let's say let's say you didn't know what the word wonder means, or you didn't, in some hypothetical scenario where you have an author and he just doesn't know what the word wonder means, right? He's not going to be able to use this in his writing if he doesn't know. So the more this writer expands his vocabulary, his or her vocabulary, the more now options he has to be more creative. So now it's kind of like, think about learning a new language. You cannot express yourself as poetically as you want to, even if you had the sentiments or the ideas, because you may not have the vocabulary, right? So that is something simple. It's like the more vocabulary you have, the more kind of tools in your tool belt. So the more you'll be able to use those things to be more creative. So in that analogy of a tool belt, like if you're trying to be a more creative builder, but you only know how to use a hammer and a screwdriver, maybe you don't know how to solder things. And so like you're not going to be able to build things with that. Instead, you're only going to be able to build things with the hammer and the screwdriver. Now, if you, and I don't know anything about building, but if you learn how to solder, then from there you can start to think about different things that you can do now with this new ability, right? So you need to master the mechanics. So for me, when it came to dancing, when it comes to salsa dancing, you need to learn the moves, you need to learn the steps, the basic steps, the foundation, and then build on top of that. And the more moves you have, the more now, so whenever you listen to music, you now have more things, more vocabulary, quote unquote, to express yourself. So this is where practice comes in. So if you want to be more creative in your craft, whatever it is that is, part of it has to do with practicing and like learning the mechanics and mastering the mechanics and widening your vocabulary. So if you're a writer, understanding sentence structure and different types of sentence structures and different types of writing structures and different and just widening your vocabulary. If you're a dancer, understanding, mastering the steps, mastering the moves, mastering musicality, that all helps, that you could practice, and that all helps with you becoming more creative. Again, because the more you know, the more you're able to use, right? And the more information that you've mastered, the more it's available at your disposal to express yourself. So when it comes to a business, for example, if there are areas of the business, let's say you have this carpet cleaning company, but you don't know how to market, your business, you're not going to be very creative when it comes to marketing. Now, if you know the mechanics of marketing, like you know how to film a video, you know how to tell a story, you know how to write copy, you know how to set up advertising, you know how to create pages, then you can start to play around and think, okay, how do I want to do this? What do I want my marketing funnel to look like? Now you can start to get more creative, but you wouldn't know that unless you've mastered the mechanics. Like you first need to know the foundations, okay? And more than the foundations, you need to know how things work. Okay, step 3. This is where you now learn frameworks, patterns, principles, and these help you become more creative. So let me explain. So there's a story about Henry Ford learning how to set up his factory into an assembly, or having the idea to set up his factory as an assembly line, and him getting that idea from, I believe it was the butcher, how they take the cow and then they butcher and they pass that along and so on. And so I don't remember if that was a true story or not, even though I read the Henry Ford book, My Life and Work. Anyway, it still makes the point here is like if you understand patterns, or principles or frameworks, you can take an idea that worked in one discipline and apply it in another discipline. That allows you to be also more creative. So again, if instead of thinking of creativity, we think of problem solving, that also knowing what works in one area can help you implement that in another area. That can help you become a better problem solver. It could help you become more creative. So like, for example, if you know how to market to attract new clients, you can take that same thing and apply it into hiring, and you know how to market to attract new talent. You take an idea from one area and then from marketing and you bring it to HR, right? So that's a quick and easy example. But let me give you another one. My dance instructor opened up my eyes to this when he explained how he choreographed. He said, when you look at a pop song, there's always like the intro, and then there is I can't even remember the structure, right? So imagine it's kind of like this, like the way you write a poem. Like it's like A, B, A, B, chorus, A, B, A, B, or C, D, C, D, chorus, outro, done. Something like that, right? So you have a pattern, a structure. Let me just draw it out for you to see what I mean. So when it comes to poetry, there's a structure like A, B, A, B. So then you have a chorus, and then you have C, D, C, D, then you have a chorus, and then you have the outro, right? So you have this structure to that, to the way poetry is written, to the way music is written. And so what my dance instructor did is he took this same structure and he applied it to dance choreography. So usually people, when it comes to dance choreography, the composition, the way they structure the choreography it's kind of random. Like they just do random moves from the moment the song begins to the moment it ends. And what he showed in this class, in this workshop, is that you can take that same poetic structure or music structure and apply it into choreography for dancing. And he's like, okay, when the song begins, they do this part of the music, we're going to do this. And then the next part, so section A, we're going to do move 1. And then section B, we're going to do this 2. Instead of doing something random right here, we're going to repeat the choreography, and then we're going to repeat the choreography again. And to me, even though it sounds simple, it was eye-opening how he took something that worked in music and in poetry, and then he applied it into dancing. So you can find patterns, principles, structures, frameworks, and take them from one area and apply them in another area. To me, that's how I've learned. So right now, I'm really just hooked into playing pickleball, and I use a lot of the patterns, a lot of the frameworks, a lot of the principles that I learned through dance and apply them into pickleball, and they work. And so that is another way to be more creative. It's like the more patterns, the more structures, the more frameworks you learn, the more you learn what has worked somewhere, then you can apply in one discipline, you could apply those to other disciplines. So that it's like we're reading a lot of biographies to see what worked for other people, learning about what made a business successful. In fact, I remember listening to an audiobook by Derek Sivers in which he talked about how his music teacher, so he used to be a musician. There's this guy named Derek Sivers, super interesting person. Check him out if you haven't. He has some insightful books. Anyway, his music teachers told them to read a book on business called Positioning. And at the beginning, he didn't want to because he's like, oh, I want to be a musician. I don't want business. But after reading it, he learned so many patterns and frameworks and things that he was able to take from how to make a business successful and apply that into his music career. And it really helped. So again, if he didn't know those things, he wasn't able to explore those possibilities. Okay, so that's another way to become more creative. Then the next step, so this is, I guess, step 4. So step number 4 is that you need to fill up your well if you want to be more creative. Okay, and so what I mean by this is that if you want to write a sad song, but you've never experienced sad experiences, you're not going to write a very good sad song. If you want to write if you want to do a painting about a mountain, but you've never been to mountains, you're not going to be able to. It's not going to come right. You're not going to be able to how to paint that mountain. And so those are simple analogies, but that same thing happens in business. So let's say for business, you're not going to be able to come up with a software for real estate agents if you've never talked to a realtor before, if you haven't been involved in the real estate industry, right? And so over here to come up with creative work, you need to essentially live life and have experiences. Now you can also read books, listen to podcasts, watch movies, go to the museum, like just in general, have experiences that fills up your well. So the more you know, again, if you know about the Chinese culture, you can use that in your creative work. But if you didn't know that, then you wouldn't be able to use that. And so the more you know, the more you have available for the more your well is filled up, the more you have available to you, right? So it's kind of like that other scenario with the learning the mechanics where you're expanding your vocabulary. Over here, so you could have the best vocabulary in the world, but if you're somebody who hasn't lived life much, you're probably not going to come up with very interesting creative work. You might be able to write well, but you're not going to be able to connect with people and so on. Or in the case of a business, you may know how business works, right? And you may know how to create a software, but if you're trying to create a software for real estate agents and you've never spoken to a realtor before, you're not going to create a real helpful software. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like that. I'm trying to draw the parallels here. Okay, so step number 5 is to create. And this is the part where a lot of people just get paralyzed. This is going back to how I started this video referencing to kids. This is where kids shine. Like when it comes to creating, they don't judge themselves. So a lot of people, when it comes to doing anything, when it comes to creating, when it comes to coming up with ideas, creating any type of work, code, art, music, they get paralyzed because they end up judging themselves. And by the way, that happens usually because if you have somebody who is paralyzed when it comes to their work and judging themselves, it's usually because they end up judging others for their work. So if that is you, then that's where, if you stop being judgmentals of other people's work, then it makes it easier for you to do your own work. Okay, so right here, creating. And I have this book right here in the back. It's called The Creative Act. And it talks about how the more you create, the more you put your ideas out there, the more your creativity muscle builds. And so the more you can create. So the more you create, the more you can create. Right? So if you never have created anything, that muscle is atrophied and you're not going to be able to create. It's going to be hard to create. The more you create, the easier it is to create. Okay? The next step in becoming more creative is sharing your work, because then you're going to get to see people's reactions to it. You're going to see, just put your work out there. That's actually the next step right here. Step 6 is to share. That'll also help you become more creative. The more you share, the more you put your work out there, the more, this is more like a woo-woo type of thing, but the more that muscle of creativity, the more the universe gives you, God gives you more ideas, the more you share, okay? And then the last part is reflect and iterate. So that's step number 7, reflect and iterate. So when you share something, you put your work out there, now you get to think about like, how could I have done this differently? What could I have done to improve that work? What could I have done to make it better? Just in general, you're just thinking, reflecting about your work, and then you go ahead and try something else or try the same thing and just do it differently. So that iteration then again allows you to build that muscle of creativity. And I'm saying creativity here, you can think of it as like problem solving as well. So those are all ways, and these are all things that you can do to become more creative. These are the steps, not in this perfect exact order. It just kind of happens organically. But this is what I think the journey that I've gone through to become more creative. I've gone through this journey when it comes to salsa dancing. So at first I learned the mechanics. So let's go through the steps right here. So the first thing is I decided I wanted to be a better salsa dancer. And then I mastered the mechanics. I learned the steps. I got really good at the moves. Then from there, I learned like that framework that I was talking about, like how do you choreograph that? I learned that from my teacher. And then I started applying that, trying to get better at that. And I got more creative. I started thinking, okay, I can create more choreographies. I started seeing how I was able to take songs and create choreographies for them just because of this framework. And then from there, I started watching more and more people dance. I started getting inspiration from different things, and that helped me create different kind of choreography. And ultimately, I created, I shared it, I perform in front of people, and I went through the same process with business. I wanted to create a business. I learned, so I paid so much money to learn from business coaches, from different mastermind groups I paid for marketing courses, business coaching, all to learn the mechanics of business. And then from there, I learned frameworks, and I learned, so like one book that comes to mind, there's a book called Principles by Ray Dalio. He shares a lot of patterns that have worked, a lot of frameworks that have worked for him and his company. I've read many biographies of successful people that allow me to see what worked in the past for others. And then for me, for example, when it comes to the business that we have now, at the beginning, we started helping dance studios for kids. And I drew from my well of my own experience having run a dance studio, but eventually I had to talk to business owners who ran their studios for kids, because we never ran a studio for kids, and we wanted to create a product for people who ran dance studios who taught children. And so I had to fill up my well, learn what their pain points were, learn what they wanted, learn what their goals were, and so on. And so that allowed me to fill up my well. And then I started to create, reflect, and iterate. And then eventually now we have a program, a product that gets people results. People really enjoy, people love our service. And so, yeah, this same process is what I have gone through. And so anyway, I wanted to share for anybody who wants to be a more creative person in any area of their lives. This is something that has helped me. So yeah, if this has been helpful, leave it a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.